So I've been playing around with different holster designs and materials, and recently I made a paddle style, like the holsters you see here, leather paddle style holsters. I made one for a 1911 that I have, and my dad liked it and asked me if I could make him one. Um, so I decided if I'm going to make him one, then I might make one for my Glock too. So that's what this video is about. Making a couple leather paddle style holsters. These templates I made up just kind of a trial and error for the 1911, and I thought because the Glock's a similar thickness that the leather probably would still work, and it ended up working just fine. So I used those templates. I originally made those out of paper, and then I transferred it to poster board, and then I'm cutting it out of leather here. And then, bandsaw might not be the best way to cut leather, but it sure is easy. So, that's why I do it this way. You could definitely do it with just a razor blade. You don't need a bandsaw. Honestly, a pair of scissors, you can make it through leather. This is about a 7 to 8 ounce leather here, veg tan leather. I get from Tandy Leather. And then I'm just following the lines as best I can with the bandsaw, and this is sped up. So once I get it all cut out, I actually wanted to tool the leather a little bit. So I made a couple of designs. My dad he's a veteran. He's retired military, and I'm a veteran. We were both in the Navy, both Seabees. Um, and so I'm doing a CB emblem on one, and I'm doing just a USN with an anchor on the other. Um, and then I figured whichever one turns out nicer is the one I'd give to him. So um, I freehanded them onto these templates, and they turned out pretty decent. So I'm just using the pressure of that pencil to transfer the lines onto the to the holster, and then I'll go back through and correct the lines. And I'm pretty new to leather work in general, but been kind of messing around with tooling leather. This is a swivel knife I'm using here, and so I'm just going around the whole design with the swivel knife and cutting in the design to the leather. And there's some pretty great videos on YouTube if you're curious on how to do that. Um, and this is just a real cheap swivel knife. I think I paid $8 for it on Amazon. Um, I'm not a big fan of buying cheap tools if I know I'm going to use them, but for something like this where I don't know if I'm going to use it because I don't know if I'm going to enjoy tooling leather, I'll buy cheap tools and then either make them better if I can or replace them with better tools down the road sometimes. But a tool like this that's less than $10, I feel like it's worth the gamble sometimes to do it. So anyway, here cutting in the design for the CB. That's a CB emblem. CB is Civil Engineer Corps for the Navy. CB is Construction Battalions. And then once I get the design, I'll cut in, and then I'll take a beveling tool and I'll bevel all the edges. And you can go way more in depth with decorating and tooling. And one thing that I have found in the minimal amount of time I've done this is what I'm going to do once I get the holsters all sewn together, glued and sewn together, is I'm going to wet form it to the pistols. So a real intricate intricate design, tool design is going to get muddled during that process. So keeping it simple. And maybe there's, if you had a dummy gun or something like you didn't mind pounding on it, you could clean it up after you got it wet formed. That's probably a good way to do that. But in my case, I'm going to wet form it. And so my design, like for shading or something like that for the tooling, I'm going to lose some of that when I do that. Um, and then the other one you can see is the USN with the anchor. And same thing, I'm just beveling the outlines of those shapes, make them stand out a little bit more. Once I'm happy with that, the next thing I want to do is this is the top part of the holster, and so where that opening is, once I get it glued and sewn together, I won't be able to work that edge anymore. So what I want to do is, that was a beveling tool right there. I'm beveling the top edges, and then I'm going to burnish the top because, like I said, once the holster's together, I can't. Not that I can't do it, I just can't do it as good of a job. So it makes more sense to do it now. Um, and so maybe you'd think, well, why not just do the whole holster now? Well, my lines aren't going to be perfect, and my edges aren't going to line up perfect, and maybe a more experienced leather worker could get that nailed down. But for me, once I get the holster together, there's going to be the edges of the holster aren't going to be great. So I'll come back and clean up all the edges once I got the rest of it together. Okay, so I burnished that, and then now I'm putting in the holes for the belt loops, is what this is. And that's just a hole punch. I think I got like a set of those at Tractor Supply for, I don't remember. It's been too long. Maybe $11. I use the same holes if I'm going to make like making my own gasket. Get some gasket material. So it's pretty useful to have around. Um, but they make hole punches that are oblong for belt loops, which I definitely feel like would be easier than what I'm doing here. But the ones I've found so far are just haven't been very inexpensive, and so this is the cheap way out for me. So I punch those holes, and then I'm going to cut um, the rest of the loop out. And just a razor knife is all I'm using here. Now, that's just a little scratch hole I made out of a screwdriver. Um, and I was marking the top where the top's going to be so I'm sanding, roughing up the veg tan leather so I'm going to put some contact cement on here. And I want it to have some mechanical adherence, so I scratch it up. So those lines just show me where to sand and where to put the glue so I don't go crazy all over the bottom of that where it's going to be exposed glue. I don't really want glue. And I did mess this up a tiny bit. You'll see maybe at the end, maybe taking a look at the holster. Anyway, this is just contact cement. I think that you're supposed to put that on, wait till it gets tacky, and then what I do is I put that on, and then I will let it tack up for 10 minutes, and then I'll put it together. So this video is cut and clipped. I clipped that 10 minutes out, obviously, but that I actually waited up for 10 minutes for that stuff to dry before I put these two pieces together. And then I don't know how long you got to leave them together, but I typically will do another 10 or 15 minutes of them just being together with that glue setting up together. And then once that's that side's glued up, and then I'll glue the other side, and I'll just put like a chunk of wood or something like to keep the glued edges from touching each other in that time that it takes to tack up. You know, I've been doing it this way for a while, so I don't really know what the can says, but I think the can actually tells you a time to let the glue set up. But um, anyway, that's how contact cement works: is let it dry for a little bit, and then put the two sides together. When they make contact, that's when they cement together. So, and then like I said, just chunks of wood to keep the edges from coming apart, and then obviously I glued the other side together, which I thought I had a clip of, but I didn't, obviously. And then, so now what I'm doing is that's a pricking iron, and that's going to put holes where I want my sew lines to be, and it evenly spaces out the holes. And so I use the biggest one I can for the long, and I have pricking irons that you buy. I bought it as a set, and it comes with different sized. How many tines there are on those? Anyway, so I get all the holes laid out, and then that's an awl I'm using now. I'm widening out the holes with an awl, and then I'll come back with a sewing needle, and then I'll sew. It's a saddle stitch. So saddle stitch, you've got thread on either side, and they cross, and make a series of crossing loops. Is how that works. And this, I think, probably is the most time-consuming part of this project. Um, so much so that I recently bought an old industrial sewing machine to sew, and it's not the right kind for leather. So might have some sewing projects coming up, but they won't be leather. So anyway, it's sewed together. It's glued and sewn together, and now I wet that leather and it makes it real pliable, soft and pliable. And then I just clamp it in my Kydex press. It's just a homemade Kydex press. I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes, and then it does a good job of wet forming the pistol. And the one thing I didn't show here very well is um, I have the top blocked for the top sight, so because you want a groove for your top sight to be able to draw your pistol in and out. And then that other tool I was manipulating the leather with was just as a bone tool. You can see a little clearer here. That piece right there is a block of wood that's double-sided tape onto. That's a 1911 compact model. Smith & Wesson is what that is. Anyway, the block's in there. I'm going to wet form this. Like I said, another 7 or 8, maybe 10 minutes. I'll come back where it's starting to take a set, and then clean up any of the places I need to clean up. I'm doing that with my fingers here, kind of making sure it's crowned around the barrel, make sure it's looking decent, that the pistol can still be pulled out. And then once I'm pretty happy with that, and that's a pretty quick process, the Kydex press is a pretty good job, and then I'll just let it sit there to dry the leather the rest of the way. Once that's done, then I go back to the bandsaw and I'll cut all the edges flush. You can easily do this again with a razor knife. You don't need a bandsaw for this. And try to round the edges a bit, make it look clean and nice. Do the rough out with a bandsaw, and then I have a number of sanders. I hate sanding, so the quicker and easier I can make sanding, the better. This is a homemade disc sander, and it's great for this sort of thing. There's actually a dust collection port on the other side, which is super helpful with this too. anyway, just continue to clean up the edges, rounding stuff over. Just use a spindle sander um, for the inside radiuses. I use this spindle sander. Then once all those edges are cleaned up and sanded down, come back with a beveling tool, which is what this is, and bevel. You know, when you sand leather, the edges kind of fray a little bit. At least the way I do it with the power sanders. Um, so I'm really what I'm doing here is kind of cutting the edges of that frayed edge, and to where it's putting a tiniest bit of chamfer on either side of the leather. And then once I get all of that beveled with the beveling tool, then burnishing it is next. Um, you know, since it's pretty cool burnishing tools, watching leather videos, you know, they have them basically on like a grinder motor or buffing wheel motor. I've seen them on um, Dremel, like rotary Dremel tools. There's a bunch of different options. Although I don't go crazy burnishing, but it just doesn't seem like that hard of a process. So if I did a bunch of leather work, I would definitely either make a tool or invest in a tool to make this easier. But as few and far between as I do this kind of thing, I don't mind doing this by hand. And it's like I said, it's not a very hard process. It it's pretty quick too. That stuff that I put on, I forget what that's called. I just went down to Tandy Leather. This I was making a sheath. The first sheath I made told the person at Tandy what I wanted to do, and they got me this for burnishing, and it works great. But I lost the label. I don't know, maybe a year ago, and I forget what it's called. But that would be my suggestion. If you want to try something like this, go down to Tandy Leather, or I'm sure there's other companies. Just Tandy's what we got out here. Anyway, and tell them what you're up to, and ask them what you need. And you know, the guys I know, guys and gals at Tandy have always been real helpful for me. Anyway, cleaning up the inside of those belt loops now, just using some woodworking chisels to straighten those edges, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll burnish these too. Once the edge is dry, then this is a dark brown dye here. I use Phoebing's Pro dye. It's always worked good for me. I haven't tried other things, so other ones might be better. They might be great. I don't know. I just use this. Um, anyway, I'm dyeing this inside and out everywhere I can get it to see. Get the dye to lay down. That's where I'm putting it. Edges. Kind of going back through, do a little touch up as needed. And then I'll take just a dry shop cloth and buff it out a little bit. Once that dries, I think this is actually next day or maybe a couple hours later. This is just a leather finish. I may end up going back and putting on some snow seal or some kind of wet wax on there, but I didn't, and I haven't yet. And you know, like I said, this is just some leather finish here. And that's pretty much it. Let this dry and then just try them out on the pistols and should be good to go. So that's Glock 19 in the frame there, and here are the finished holsters. My dad was out of town when I finished this, and so I didn't get. I obviously checked his later, but good. But there you go. There's the finished product. Thanks for watching. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button.